The village of Black Hollow was draped in an eerie silence as I arrived. The air was thick with an almost tangible stillness, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The silence was not just the absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a whisper of secrets long buried. Mist clung to the cobblestone streets, swirling around my feet like ghostly fingers. It moved with a life of its own, curling and uncurling, as if trying to communicate in a language I could not understand. The mist seemed to be a living entity, wrapping itself around the village, hiding its secrets and stories. A chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something ancient, something unsettling. The trees themselves seemed to be whispering, their branches swaying and creaking as if sharing tales of old. The wind was not just a breeze but a messenger, bringing with it the echoes of the past. I had come to Black Hollow seeking solace, a retreat from the city's cacophony. The hustle and bustle of urban life had worn me down, and I yearned for peace and quiet. The village, with its promise of tranquility, seemed like the perfect escape. Little did I know that the silence here was of a different kind, one that spoke of hidden fears and unspoken truths. Its isolation appealed to me, the quiet solitude promising a much-needed respite. The village was nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, cut off from the rest of the world. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the modern world had not yet intruded. But this isolation also meant that the village had its own rhythm, its own secrets. Little did I know that I had stumbled into a place where silence spoke volumes, and solitude was a curse rather than a blessing. The quiet here was oppressive, almost suffocating, as if the village itself was trying to keep something hidden. The more I walked through the empty streets, the more I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The villagers, their faces etched with a weariness that ran deeper than age, greeted me with wary eyes. Their expressions were a mix of caution and curiosity, as if they were unsure whether to welcome me or warn me. Their eyes seemed to hold 1,000 stories, each one more haunting than the last. Their words were sparse, their smiles strained. It was as if they were afraid to say too much, to reveal too much. Every conversation was laced with an undercurrent of tension, a sense that there was something they were all avoiding, something they were all afraid to speak of. When I inquired about the imposing manor that loomed over the village, a palpable unease settled over them. The manor was a dark silhouette against the sky, its windows like empty eyes watching over the village. It was a place that seemed to hold the very essence of the village's secrets. "Best not to speak of it," the innkeeper muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes darted around nervously as if he feared being overheard. There was a gravity in his words, a warning that I could not ignore. Best to leave the past undisturbed. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was clear that the manor was more than just an old building. It was a symbol of something much darker, something that the villagers were all too eager to forget. His words did little to quell my curiosity. In fact, they only served to deepen it. What was it about this manor that caused such fear? What secrets did it hold? The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to uncover the truth. In fact, they ignited a spark within me, a desire to understand the secrets that clung to Black Hollow like the ever-present mist. I knew that I could not leave without finding out what lay behind the village's eerie silence and the villagers' haunted eyes. The mystery of Black Hollow had become my own, and I was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. Black Hollow Manor stood at the edge of the village, a specter against the stormy sky. The villagers often spoke of it in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously towards its looming presence whenever a storm rolled in. It was as if the manor itself summoned the dark clouds, casting a perpetual shadow over the village. Its once grand facade was now crumbling, consumed by creeping ivy and shrouded in an oppressive silence. The windows, once filled with light and laughter, were now dark and hollow like the eyes of a long-forgotten ghost. The air around the manor was thick with the scent of decay, a stark reminder of its former glory now lost to time. Drawn by an unseen force, I found myself standing at its rusted gates, a shiver crawling down my spine. The iron bars were cold to the touch, and as I pushed them open they groaned in protest as if warning me to turn back. But curiosity, that relentless beast, urged me forward. Local legend held that the manor was cursed, haunted by a malevolent entity. Stories of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and unexplained disappearances had been passed down through generations. The manor's dark history was etched into the very fabric of the village, a tale of woe and mystery that refused to be forgotten. They spoke of a headless horseman, a harbinger of doom, who roamed the grounds at night. His presence was said to bring misfortune to anyone who crossed his path. The villagers claimed to have seen his shadowy figure galloping through the mist, his headless form a terrifying sight against the moonlit sky. The Dullahan, they called it, its name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. This spectral rider was more than just a ghost. He was a symbol of the manor's cursed fate, a relentless reminder of the darkness that dwelled within its walls. The very mention of his name sent chills down the spines of those who dared to speak it. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I ventured further into the estate's grounds. The overgrown path was treacherous, with roots and vines threatening to trip me at every step. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring to keep the manor's secrets hidden. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. It was an unnatural silence, one that pressed down on me like a weight. Even the birds and insects seemed to avoid this place, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the creeping sense of dread that gnawed at my resolve. It felt as though the very walls were watching me, their shadows whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. The flickering light from my lantern cast eerie shapes that danced and twisted, playing tricks on my mind. Every creak and groan of the old building seemed to carry a message, a warning that I was not welcome here. Amongst the overgrown weeds and crumbling statues, I stumbled upon a hidden crypt. It was almost as if it had been waiting for me, its presence both ominous and inviting. The crypt's entrance was barely visible, concealed by the thick ivy that clung to its stone walls like a shroud. Its entrance was concealed by ivy, the iron gate rusted with time. The gate's intricate design was now barely recognizable, corroded by years of neglect. As I reached out to touch it, the metal flaked away under my fingers, a testament to the passage of time and the secrets it guarded. With a sense of foreboding, I pushed open the gate and stepped inside. The air within was colder still, and the darkness seemed to swallow the light from my lantern. Each step echoed in the confined space, amplifying the sound of my heartbeat. I knew I was on the brink of uncovering something long buried, something that perhaps should have remained hidden. That night, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows of my room at the inn. The old building creaked and groaned under the relentless assault of the storm, as if it were alive and sharing in my unease. Sleep eluded me, my mind plagued by images of the manor and the whispered tales of the Dullahan. The stories I had heard earlier in the evening replayed in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. I could almost hear the hushed voices of the villagers warning of the headless rider who roamed the countryside on nights like this. A sense of dread seeped into my bones, a primal fear I couldn't shake off. It was as if the very air in the room had thickened, pressing down on me with an invisible weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside seemed to carry a sinister undertone. Suddenly, from outside the village came a blood-curdling scream, followed by a deafening clatter of hooves. The sound was so abrupt and jarring that it felt like a physical blow, jolting me upright in bed. My heart raced as I strained to hear more, the silence that followed almost more terrifying than the noise itself. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to spin around me as I fumbled with the curtains, my hands trembling with fear. Outside, the village lay shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flicker of a lantern in the distance. Through the swirling mist, I saw him, the Dullahan. His form was barely visible at first, a shadow among shadows, but as he drew closer, his terrifying visage became unmistakable. The mist seemed to part before him, as if even the elements were afraid to touch him. He rode a massive black steed, its hooves striking sparks on the cobblestone street. The horse's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, casting eerie reflections on the wet stones. Each step it took seemed to reverberate through the ground, a harbinger of doom. In his hand he held his own severed head, its eyes burning with an infernal light. The head's mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, as if mocking the living. The sight was so horrifying that I could scarcely believe it was real, yet I couldn't look away. The Dullahan's laughter echoed through the night, a chilling sound that spoke of death and despair. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. The laughter grew louder, more maniacal, as if he were reveling in the fear he inspired. I watched in terrified fascination as the headless horseman rode past the inn, his gaze sweeping over the village. His presence seemed to cast a pall over everything, the very air growing colder in his wake. The villagers' homes, once safe havens, now seemed like fragile shells, unable to protect against the malevolent force that rode among them. For a moment our eyes met, and a jolt of pure terror shot through me. It was as if time itself had stopped, the world narrowing to just the two of us. His eyes, though severed from his body, seemed to hold a malevolent intelligence, a knowing that chilled me to the core. It felt as though he were looking directly at me, into my very soul. The connection was brief, but intense, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. As he rode away, the sense of dread lingered, a dark cloud that would haunt me long after the night had passed. The following morning, desperate for answers, I sought out the village elder, a woman known only as Old Maggie. They said she was the keeper of Black Hollow's history, the only one who dared to speak of the curse. Maggie lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by books and herbs. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a spark of ancient wisdom. When I spoke of the Dullahan, a look of profound sadness crossed her face. "The Dullahan is no mere phantom," she said, her voice raspy with age. "He is a harbinger of death, a collector of souls bound to this cursed land." According to Maggie, the Dullahan was once a warrior, cursed by a vengeful witch to ride for eternity without his head. His only solace was to claim the souls of those connected to the curse that bound him. Driven by a need to understand the Dullahan's hold on Black Hollow, I returned to the manor. The crypt, with its musty air and crumbling headstones, seemed to beckon me closer. I found myself drawn to a particular grave, its inscription barely visible beneath the grime of ages. Crouching down, I brushed away the dirt and made out the name etched into the weathered stone. It was my family name. As I stared at the inscription, a horrifying realization dawned on me. My ancestors were the ones who had brought the curse upon Black Hollow. I discovered old letters hidden within the crypt, chronicles of betrayal and dark magic. Centuries ago, my ancestor, a powerful landowner, had broken a pact with a coven of witches, refusing them refuge within the manor's walls. In retaliation, they cursed him and his lineage, binding the Dullahan to their bloodline. He would forever ride, claiming the souls of his descendants as payment for his eternal torment. Panic seized me as I realized the true extent of my predicament. The Dullahan wasn't just a local legend, he was a personal executioner, and I was his next target. The curse, dormant for generations, had awakened. It was a ticking time bomb, and time was running out. The villagers had warned me about the Dullahan's mark, a physical manifestation of his claim on a soul. It began with a coldness, a creeping numbness that spread from the extremities inward. That night as I lay in bed, fear gnawing at my insides, I felt it. A bone-chilling cold spread through my limbs, turning my fingers and toes numb. Panic welled up inside me, choking me with its icy grip. The curse was taking hold.